So, very happy to be with you guys today. I think I met Diana at the launch of my book at the Brookings. Is that right, Diana?
Yes, that's
I
right.
think so. Yeah. So, today we want to talk about the problem of education, and we're hoping to use this as a cautionary tale because we don't want you following in the footsteps of the United States. We'll introduce the learning illusion and a solution, talk about the 6 C's, and we'll have some case studies and talk about how to take the science of learning out of the lab. Okay, so the US is in an education pickle. The new PISA scores just came out, and we're not doing well. PISA scores are for reading, science, and math for 14-year-olds in many OECD countries. We are 12th in the percent of citizens with college degrees. A group of 21st Century Partnership CEOs said that our graduates are not prepared for the workforce. The military is worried, and Newsweek decries our creativity crisis. So don't do what we're doing because in the US, evidence-based research is not much used, and instead the learning industry has lots of testing and a lot of teaching to the test. And I talk to teachers, and they're very upset about this because it has taken away their autonomy in the classroom. Now, the question you might ask is whether using these high stakes tests has made a difference for children. But as the graph below shows, we have an achievement gap that has stayed stable for 25 years. So much for proclaiming high standards, using high stakes tests. You can do better. Tutoring companies are focusing on the preschool set in the United States. Business is up for 20%. And there's a $20 billion educational toy industry, which is not what children need to succeed in the world. So this is one of our favorites. It's a computer for a little girl that's in all the little girly colors. Personally, I hate that. And we're wearing out our youngest kids by engaging in drill and kill activities rather than playful and meaningful learning, even at the youngest ages. So, on the one hand, we have this huge and profitable learning industry that's defined learning as memorization of content and scores on a narrowly construed test. But on the other hand, we have all these people, including myself, who are studying the science of learning or the learning sciences, whatever you want to call it, where learning is defined as a suite of skills that children need to master to be happy and healthy and not just ready for the workplace of tomorrow. And among these skills are processes of learning like emotion regulation, not lashing out when you're angry, not just bursting into tears, but learning how to manage your emotions, and executive function, learning to inhibit, to hold things in short term memory, and to be able to rapidly switch gears in the classroom. So we just talked about the education problem, and now we're on to introducing the learning illusion and a solution in the form of what we talk about as the 6 C's. So think of this six-sided cube as representing various things that children might learn. Notice that the cube on the left shows content in the forefront. We have been making a huge deal about content and memorization, but what we would like to do is flip the illusion so that content, while critically important, is seen as only one aspect of learning that leads for success. So we don't want to throw out content, but we want to place it in its rightful place among other skills children need to know. So importantly, we're leaving the information age, we're getting the factoids is enough, and entering a knowledge age where information is doubling every 2.5 years. One estimate has us uh, encountering the equivalent of 174 newspapers a day. That's how much information is coming at us. So integrating information and innovation is key. So as Daniel Pink, the author of A Whole New Mind, writes, the past few decades have belonged to a certain kind of person with a certain kind of mind. Computer programmers who could crank code, lawyers who could craft contracts, MBAs who could crunch numbers. But the keys to the kingdom are changing hands. The future belongs to a very different kind of person with a very different kind of mind. Creators and empathizers, pattern recognizers, and meaning makers. These people, artists, inventors, designers, storytellers, caregivers, consolers, big picture thinkers, will now reap society's richest rewards. And the Partnership for 21st Century Skills tells us that in economies driven by innovation and knowledge, in diverse workplaces and communities that hinge on collaborative relationships and networking, the ingenuity, agility, and skills of the American people. Think of Pan America, all of your countries as well, are crucial to competitiveness in the New World Order. This is also true at the college level. Lawrence Summers writes that the world is changing very rapidly. Most companies look nothing like they did 50 years ago. This is a consequence of the proliferation of knowledge and how much of it any student can truly absorb. So everyone is recognizing that the world is changing rapidly and that we need our education systems to change too to meet these new challenges. So success in school and in the global workplace of the 21st century requires what we've called the 6 C's in our new book, Becoming Brilliant. And Valentina, you and I hadn't talked about this, but I'm happy to send a PDF of the slides if I go too quickly and people want to go back and look at them. So what are these 6 C's? Well, collaboration. We now collaborate with people around the world. International boundaries are melting away. We can't even find some of the places on the map for people we're collaborating with. Communication is the grease that allows the new paradigm of international commerce to advance. And we have to learn to listen, and we have to learn to argue persuasively, and we have to learn to write well and to take cultural differences into account. Content is obviously the 3 R's, but it's also more, including science and history and the arts. Critical thinking is essential because 21st century knowledge workers, as Peter Drucker called them, must ask the right questions and must be able to find and synthesize the information they need among this proliferation of information we face. Creative innovation is absolutely crucial because we face amazingly complex problems that we have to work together to solve. Confidence, from physics to pharmaceuticals to plastics. If the environments for students do not make it safe to take risks and fail, we become a nation of stagnant followers, which is true for all of us. We must encourage our students to learn from their mistakes and not just be ashamed of them. So, if we want to prepare students for the workplace of tomorrow, uh, we have to figure out not only what children need to know, but how they learn. And when we focus on how children will learn, we know from decades of research that they learn best when they're engaged, active, and doing something that is meaningful to them, and often when they're in the context of social interaction as well. So we want to flip the learning illusion. We want to make it possible for children to learn content, so crucial, but all the other skills they need as well. So one recent study, for example, celebrated a Montessori education over more traditional education. As you guys probably know, Montessori classrooms are more developmentally appropriate. Children do a lot of hands-on activities and make a lot of choices. They embrace a metaphor of learning that's playful, in which children are more active and less passively involved in their learning. How did the results of this random assignment study turn out? It was conducted, I believe, in Cleveland, where children's parents literally picked their names out of a hat to see who would be in the traditional classroom and who would be in the Montessori classroom. Now, the Montessori classroom, of course, had all the equipment and accoutrements that go along with Montessori education. But importantly, these people who participated in the study were exactly the same background. It was determined by lottery which one they got. So children in Montessori classrooms at age 5 did better in academic tasks like reading and math, better in social tasks that required positive peer play, and better in tasks that required attention to another person's beliefs, or what we call theory of mind. By age 12, children in Montessori classrooms liked school more, were more creative in their writing, and still did better in reading and math. Many other studies also support the fact that playful learning in the classroom makes a big difference for how much children learn. Now we're up to case studies. Okay, so we sometimes in the past have talked about, like in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, the Capulets and the Montagues, and being warring factions. So we want to ask, is it direct instruction where you just talk at kids versus playful learning, or is it learning via play? And my informants tell me that this war is starting in Australia, it's already in England, and maybe in some of your countries too. People are talking about either direct instruction or playful learning and creating a big dichotomy that shouldn't be there, because a strong curriculum should be delivered with a playful pedagogy that includes free play. That's where we played on our own and sometimes got into trouble, but we called the shots, and guided play, where a planned play environment enriched with objects and toys that provide experiential learning opportunities is present. And Montessori is a great example of that, freedom within a prepared environment, and where teachers enhance children's exploration and learning by co-playing with them, by asking open-ended questions and suggesting novel ways for children to explore the materials. I am not reading everything on this slide. The idea is to show you that there's much research supporting the fact that a playful pedagogy leads to strong outcomes. Now, while many of these studies are correlational, a surprising number also use random assignments to show the benefits of playful learning. Why might it work? Well, it's consistent with well-worn developmental principles of how kids learn. As we've been saying, children learn best when they're active, not passive, when they're constructing their knowledge and not just regurgitating information, when knowledge is meaningful to them and links up to their lives, and when we take a whole child approach to learning. Children are more than just their brains. They have feelings, hearts, and they need to interact socially as well. So playful learning naturally uses mechanisms that foster strong learning, capitalizing on children's interests, on their engagement, on their intrinsic motivation. It comes from the inside, and their autonomy and attention. In fact, the data suggests that the memorization heavy one right answer approach is not consistent with the evidence. Kids need to reach the highest level on the PISA. How do they do that? The highest level requires application. It is not by memorizing. You have to be able to figure out how to take your knowledge to new problems. So children learn best. This is the mantra of the talk, when they're active, engaged, meaningful, and when they can connect what they've learned to prior knowledge. And Mickey Chi has a good paper on this. So let's look at examples from social development. So probably a lot of you have not heard of Dr. Benjamin Spock, even though he's the world's most famous pediatrician. He is the first one to have written baby and child care back in the 40s. And the Mr. Spock is probably familiar to more of you. Mr. Spock of Star Trek fame did not get that social and emotional regulation matters. but Benjamin Spock did. So, what is emotional regulation? It includes impulse and emotion control, as we said earlier, self guidance of thought and behavior, private speech, planning, self reliance, and socially responsible behavior, as simple as cleanup. And it develops through playful interaction with adults and peers and predict out to academic achievement and persistence, task mastery, and other important skills. These are the skills we have to get into our kids, whatever it is they're going to study and go on to do. So let's look at examples from academic learning. So focus on reading, for example, telling stories, wordplay, singing songs. These are the kinds of things that help children learn the prerequisites for reading and come to enjoy reading, and they're all playful in nature. Dialogic reading is when adults ask children, follow children's lead. Children have a little pointing finger. Now is not the time to tell children to not interrupt because reading is supposed to build on what they find interesting. And when we talk about what's going on in the book from their perspective. Oh, look, that dog looks like Nana's dog. We make reading come alive for children. That's playful and it's fun. When children act out, as in dramatic play, the stories they've read, they learn tons. So, one recent example comes from people who are actually at my university, the University of Delaware. They wanted to teach children new vocabulary items, and they used all Head Start children, and they gave half the children little figurines to play with after they were hearing the story, and the other children just heard the words again. And what they found, as you can see, is that children who were in the play condition learned more words at post-test, although the groups were equal at pre-test, that's on the left. But at post-test, the kids who had engaged in play learned more words. So this is another example of how what we call guided play makes a difference in children geometry learning. So, of course, you would all be able to say which one of these are real triangles. You know the triangle with the broken top is not a triangle. The triangle that has four sides is not a triangle on the top left. You'd be good at this as adults. So we wanted to study this in kids, and we know that shape concepts start out with kids looking for like the point at the top in the triangle, but they have to get beyond that because they have to know what the properties of the triangle are. So we asked whether guided play might be a better way to learn than is direct instruction or free exploratory play. We actually used four different shapes, triangles, rectangles, pentagons, and hexagons with 4-year-olds in an experiment that had three different conditions. So in guided play, children were taught the rule-based classification systems for these shapes. So for example, triangles have three corners. We didn't call them angles. Three corners and three sides. And that's what we wanted to teach the kids. But we did it in a fun way. We said the experimenter told the child that they were detectives and they were going to discover the secrets of the shapes. And then the child played along with the adult who tried to follow the child's lead in revealing what the properties of these shapes are. In direct instruction, the tester was equally charming. She also had children think that they were detectives discovering the secrets of the shapes, but the child sat and watched the adult do the task. The child did not participate. And in exploratory play, children played with shape cutouts for approximately the same amount of time as the training conditions. For test, they were told that Lilu, the picky ladybug, only liked real shapes and that she needed help in sorting some shape cards. So they showed this blue bucket, that is the trash can where they should throw the shapes that weren't real. And there's a pink ladybug box behind the experimenter's hand where the child was to put the real shapes. And the standard target shape, so the triangle with the top, is placed in front of the child, so the child doesn't have to remember what the target shape looked like. So if you want to guess where they learned best, given that we can't interact, I'll go right to the results. So what should you look at first? Look at the blue bars. The blue bars show how the groups did on the typical shapes, like the triangle with the point at the top. Of course, adults are perfect in everything. In guided play, children were able to sort over 90% of the shapes correctly. In direct instruction, they learned, but only approaching 70%. And in free play, they didn't learn very much at all. They were at chance because it's 50-50 whether you throw the card into the trash or into the ladybug box. Notice what happened with the atypical shapes. I love, love, love this finding. With the atypical shapes that you saw when we first started, triangles that children did not see during training, the guided play kids got over 90%, got over 70% correct. That's the red bar. While the children who are in the direct instruction condition only got about 35% correct. That is a huge difference. This difference tells us that when children participate in their own learning, they can transfer what they have learned to new shapes they've never seen before. So guided play works. And it tells us we can have a rich curricular content and adopt a playful pedagogy. These are not incompatible. Now we're going to take the science of learning out of the lab and see how we can infuse the environments around children with the learning opportunities they need. First, we have to recognize that a huge gap exists in what we know in science with the learning sciences and what we're actually doing with the learning industry. It's time to bridge this gap between the learning sciences and the learning industry because the science offers virtual consensus that children who have time to discover and explore through play learn skills like the 6 C's required for success in the global world. It's also time to bring the science into the community. We know that children learn the 6 C's through playful learning. So what we've done is we've turned supermarkets into children's museums by hanging up signs like talking to your child helps their language grow. We did this in both low income and middle income environments. And we hung up other signs like what's your favorite vegetable, question for your child, I'm a red delicious apple, can you find other kinds of apples? Now, the people who are listening to me talk are middle class. And when you go to the supermarket with your child, you're talking to your child all the time because you recognize how many learning opportunities are present there. But low-income parents talk far less to their children for a variety of reasons when they're in the supermarket. So what happened? Did we see a difference? Now, look at the bars on the right first. The bars on the right, the blue and the red, are what happened in middle-income supermarkets when the signs were down, that is not present, or up. No difference, because we talk to our kids in the supermarket. But on the left-hand side, the blue bar shows with the signs down, the red bar shows with the signs up. We get a 30% increase in how much parents talk with children when the signs are up. We have supermarket projects now in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in South Africa, and in Ohio. And on October 3rd, 2010, we took the science of learning and put it in the hands of families in Central Park with the ultimate block party. We wanted to show families how children learn through play and how it isn't all about drill and kill. We had 28 different activities, all rooted in the science of learning. We had an amazing scientific advisory group comprised of all the best minds in child development in the country. And we had very professional looking exhibits. But did anyone show up for this crazy idea? So we were actually shocked because over 50,000 people came, and there were people of all stripes, some of whom had never been in Central Park before, to see the science of learning in action. And we also had block parties in Toronto, Canada, Baltimore, Maryland, and their Association of Children's Museums is partnering with us now, and every time they have a conference, they will have an ultimate block. So my point is that playful learning can help children develop the 21st century skills they need in collaboration, communication, content, critical thinking, creative innovation, and confidence. And it's our job to use playful learning as a key pedagogy for education, both in and out of school. Children only spend 20% of their waking time in school. So we really must provide opportunities for learning for them outside of school. So thanks for listening. I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Professor Golinkoff, for this interesting and excellent presentation on the importance of playful learning in early childhood education. In this moment, we open the floor for questions, and I would like to start with one that Gabriela Campos asked. Why is it so difficult for some teachers and principals to really accept and encourage the game in the classroom?
Oh, that's a really good one. Um, some of it may be how they were treated themselves when they were children. Some of it may be that they were not encouraged to question. And if you're not encouraged to question, and people tell you to be seen and not heard, as we used to say in the United States, then you're going to think that that's the way children should be treated. Unfortunately, it flies in the face of what we know about how children learn best. And they learn best when they can ask questions, when we treat them with respect and take their questions seriously, and when we help them construct the answers rather than just telling them the answers. So I guess we need to get to these people by sharing the literature with them and showing them what the research tells us about how children learn best. There's also a kind of relinquishment of control. If you let children ask questions, you may not get through your materials. And if you're very concerned about getting through your materials, even more concerned than whether or not your children understand, you're not going to allow a playful environment to exist in your classroom.
Thank you, Professor Golinkoff, for your answer. We also have other questions from Aida Fernandez and Yamile Rangel Martinez. Aida asks, do you think it's compatible with new technologies?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. When computers came out, people said, oh, education is solved. But uh, it wasn't true. And the same thing is true with tablets and the new technologies that are available. They can't do all the work. We still need to have teachers interacting with children, parents interacting with children. And I hope there's still a lot of conversation and debate that goes on in classrooms and that children are still doing lots of hands-on things. One interesting point that you might note is that there was an article in the New York Times a while back about how the people who work in Silicon Valley, which is where so much of this new technology is born in the United States, tend to put their children in schools where there is no technology on purpose. So I think there is a recognition that children need lots of hands-on experiences, and technology is not the whole answer by any means, although it can be very exciting.
Thank you, Professor. Jamila Rangel asks, what do you think about inclusive education? I think she's trying to address how you can use playful learning with people with disabilities, if you have.
I do not have much experience in people with disabilities per se. In the United States, many special education children are mainstreamed. Um, I think children who have learning issues um, need more reinforcement for what it is they're learning, and I don't mean giving them M&Ms. I mean encountering the same material with a higher frequency than typical children. Children with learning disabilities may not make the same inferences that typical children make. So, sure, there have to be adjustments for children with learning disabilities, but would you want to be in a classroom where it was drill and kill 24/7? I wouldn't. I would want to be in a position to make choices, to interact with my peers around projects, to ask questions, and to understand that learning is a pleasure. One of the key elements of succeeding in the 21st century is the word flexibility. You must be flexible because circumstances are changing more rapidly than they ever have in our history. You must learn new things flexibly. You must know how to adapt. And if your classroom just requires following rules and you sitting in your seat like a lump and not getting to interact with others, you're not going to learn the 6 C's that you need to get on in the brave new world that we're in.
Thank you, Professor Golinkoff. So, while you were talking about the importance of changing, the paradigm in the learning and the teaching, I was wondering what role do parents and also principals and other actors of the educational community play in this new way of understanding learning and teaching, and what, from your experience, what tools or methodologies they can use to get involved in this.
Well, they first have to try to remember what it was like when they were kids and how they learned best. They didn't learn best by straight memorization of things that they didn't understand. They learned best when they were excited and engaged and involved. And that's when they would come home from school and tell their parents what they had learned. So we need to help people get in touch with the new science of learning, which is not new, it may be new to them. But these findings have been around for 30 years about how children learn best. And we need to change what we're doing because the new world is not going to require children to follow orders. The new world is going to require children to be creative and collaborative and make mistakes and learn from them. And if we don't change what we're offering, our children will not be in the job market of the future. The World Economic Forum argues that we are going to lose something like 40% of our jobs to automation, meaning computers and robots. So for our children to have jobs, they have to have the jobs that computers and robots can't do well. So those are the things that we talk about in the 6 C's. And parents are crucial here as well. Parents have to encourage questioning. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that parents shouldn't have some absolute rules, like you don't cross the street without holding an adult's hand. I mean, come on. But parents who shut their children down and don't answer their questions and don't encourage them to question. Like, why do you think that building has a ladder on it? What's that about? Simple things like that that don't cost anything. My metaphor is as long as parents and teachers can get the wheels to turn in little children's minds, and older children too, then they're going to create thinkers and not just followers. And that's what we all want for our kids.
Thank you, Professor Golinkoff. We have another question from Claudette Fonkang Mungal. She asks, is there empirical evidence that folks who end up working in high tech in Silicon Valley or who become successful entrepreneurs had an early play?
So that's a fabulous question. And I don't have that data. But can you imagine people making technological breakthroughs without having, first, they have to have a ton of content. We know content is essential. A social psychologist whose name I can't recall talked about the 10,000 hour rule. You really got to know your stuff if you're going to be able to use your critical thinking to figure out what the next step is and where we should go. So people who have learned to follow orders and not question the status quo are very unlikely to be among the most creative. For example, people who are raised by authoritarian parents who require rule following and no discussion are often not among our best students. But, there was, it's a great question, but there was a question earlier that seems to have moved on about getting language into the classroom. And as a person who studies language development, I have to respond to that. So much of what we're talking about, children's success in school and in life, is rooted in good language skills. And we have talked about languageizing the classroom and making sure that we invite children to speak with us as teachers, to speak with each other, to speak with parents. We just sent off a paper for publication that showed that children's language skills, even more than executive function, was able to predict their success in school in all subjects through the third and fifth grade. So language is absolutely key. It's even crucial for math. And children hear their parents say a lot of words, like 1, 8, 9, 10, and how many you think there is? They do much better in math than when they hear few number words. So language is absolutely crucial to success.
Thank you, Professor Golinkoff. Aida Fernandez asked if you have any experience on learning a second language.
I would think it would be extremely effective. Of course, as learning a second language, there's a lot of stuff you got to memorize. But when people do things like asking students to act out scenarios in another language, as one of our late professors, Bob DiPietro, did, people learn more. And again, it's because they have to find the words, they have to figure out how to express themselves. It's a whole different thing than just memorizing words and word meanings and conjugations.
Thank you, Professor Golinkoff. So we still have some minutes to more questions, and while we wait for the participants to place them on the chat, I would like to thank you once again for accepting our invitation and sharing with us your experience on play and playful learning in early childhood education. I want to also thank the participants that registered and also that attended this webinar today. And I want to let you know that all the materials that we'll use for this webinar, including the synopsis, the PowerPoint presentation, and also the video recording of this webinar, will be available in our virtual community of practice at the link that you see there in iternamericas.org. And you mentioned, Professor, that you were going to share with me a PDF with some resources. and I can also post them on this group.
So if you have the PowerPoint, it's the same as what I would do with the PDF. I would just PDF my slides. But if you're going to put up the PowerPoint, you got it.
Yeah, I will. So if we have more questions, please place them on the chat. If not, I think we can close this session and let's see, Gabriela.
Well, thank you very much. I would rather be anywhere but where I am today. Your countries are the countries I would go to. It's like 36 degrees here, and I prefer warm.
I know here in Washington, D.C. is really cold too.
Yeah, no, not Washington. I got to go more south than that for relief.
Yeah, that's true. So we have Gabriela Campos. She says, I am an English teacher trying to make my students to do what we are talking about here, adding creativity, toys, dramatization, songs, involvement, but my class is often criticized. What should I say? Or
So, when we wrote Einstein Never Used Flashcards, teachers and parents told us that they finally had something they could take into the administration and say, look, this is how kids learn. I would say do the same thing with my latest book, Becoming Brilliant. Do the same thing with another book we wrote called A Mandate for Playful Learning in Preschool. Curricula should not be determined by the whim of administrators, but by the research literature on how children learn best. So I don't think you'd get anywhere with administrators who tell you you shouldn't do this stuff just by saying that you think it's good for them. I think you need to show them the scientific evidence behind your intuitions, which happen to be correct. You are correct. That people learn best when they are involved, when they can dramatize, when they can sing, and when their involvement is pleasurable. There's no question, no question. Children learn best that way. Now, free play, remember, is not as effective for meeting curricular goals as guided play. Free play is a wonderful thing. We all need it, and our children need it. But free play is not constrained, whereas guided play puts you on a path because either the materials are structured to help you discover things, or your interactions with the adult who has a curricular goal in mind steers you in a direction. So guided play reduces the openness of the field and helps in a very implicit and playful way steer children toward what it is adults think is important for them to learn. So while I think free play is fabulous, it's really guided play that works best for reaching curricular goals in the classroom.
thank you, Professor Golinkoff. Gabriela Campos thanks you, and she appreciates all the insights and the answers that you have provided.
Thank you for
So if
allowing me.
we Yeah, I think we don't have more questions, so I guess we can say this is the end of this webinar, and we look forward for the upcoming webinars in 2017. Happy holidays to everybody, and thank you so much for your participation. And once again, Professor Golinkoff, thank you so much for accepting the invitation.
Thank you. Happy holidays.